Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Smart Money Show. I'm one of your hosts, Ali Suleiman, as usual, and I'm joined by my co-host, Naman Akhtar, as usual. How are you, bro? How's things?
I'm good. Everything's going smooth. We're back in action. And what about you? How's it going for you?
I'm all right. I mean, we're in the Uni of Notts right now, which I've never been to. You keep saying you'll bring me down to your university, but you never have. So now we're here to film an episode.
Today's the day, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, as I said, you might have noticed that we're filming somewhere new. So a big thanks to the Uni of Nottingham for letting us film an episode here. We promise to bring even more in-person shoots to your screens very soon, as we have done in the past. But without further ado, I want to pass over to Naman. Who are we joined by today?
Yeah, well, our guest today is actually my personal mentor, Rebecca Knowles, and she's a third-year economics student at Nottingham. And well, since early on in her university life, she's taken a really proactive approach into her, career path. So, and she's got such a varied set of experiences, which will be so helpful for our viewers and listeners. So these experiences include being a tech/quant analyst for NEFS, being a equity analyst for NEFS, and of course being a consulting analyst for NEFS as well. And then alongside that, she's had a senior position in the Nottingham Trading Society, and with that, she's also been running different projects alongside all those experiences, and of course all the uni work. So a very, very strong individual. And last but not least, she's also in her third year. Her swan song, you could say, is that, or in my opinion, is that she's the consulting director of NEFS. So that's a very, very big position, if those who know NEFS. So and then of course, the reason why I think Rebecca's going to be a really, really good guest for you guys is that she's really done the ideal career path for those aiming in finance. So if you guys know about spring weeks, she got a spring week, converted that to a summer, and now of course she's converted that into a full-time grad role at Deloitte. So without further ado, Rebecca, how's your day going?
It's going good. I'm very happy after that amazing introduction.
We do like to do that, to be fair. It's very famous, like, sort of podcast introduction thing, like Jay Shetty does it. Do a really big introduction, then hopefully it's no pressure on you to live up to it because you already have. But yeah, as we said at the start, there's a lot to talk about in this episode, and to kind of go over what we're talking about, we'll be diving into your journey, from your background and early interest in finance to also your experiences applying for internships and your top tips for securing them. But we'll also explore the role and division of consulting a little bit within finance, the process of converting internships into grad roles, and the importance a little bit of extracurricular activities. Plus a lot more, depends where the conversation goes. So I'm going to kick it off, Naman, if that's all right. Always like to. So very broad question to start things off, Rebecca. What was it like growing up, and what's your educational journey been like?
Okay, so growing up, I grew up in decently small town in Essex, near Southend, but a little bit more rural than Southend actually is. I then went to a all-girls grammar school. I did decent in GCSEs for a grammar school, but not outstanding, and then chose to do geography, maths, and biology in A-levels, and I actually failed maths really badly in the first term, so I picked up economics because it was the only subject that would allow me to pick it up at that point, which is a bit of a happy accident. I thought at first during GCSEs I wanted to do architecture. I then thought I wanted to do a biology degree. My dad convinced me to do economics, but I'm very happy that he did in a way, more because of career prospects, that it didn't look as promising with biology. And I did quite well in my A-levels, ended up here because the best uni that doesn't need maths to do economics. But again, that was a bit of a happy accident, and I'm really happy at the uni here. So.
Yeah. No hate to anyone that did biology, by the way.
Yeah.
It
would have been more of a passionate thing for me.
Yeah.
But I think I looked at the career prospects, and even doing biology at some of the London unis, it was like a 40% employment rate after a year and a half. Yeah. And I'm too much of an anxious person for that, to not know where my life's heading. So.
Yeah, no, 100%. But then I know you spoke about that by chance when you picked up econ as a subject, but then were there any other pivotal moments that kind of pushed you towards maybe finance?
Yeah, economics was the only subject that would take me on after I failed maths. I originally tried to do business A-level, but they wouldn't let me on because they said it would be too much catching up to do. Economics were a bit iffy on letting me on because I thought I wouldn't be able to catch up in time, but I managed to get an A star in economics, so Clearly it wasn't there, thank you. It wasn't too much of an issue. And then joining the university really pushed me into finance, I would say, and in particular it would be NEFS, so Nottingham Economics and Finance Society, a little plug, not that they need it. I had absolutely no idea about finance, so my parents are both so far away from finance and a slightly older generation than most people's parents, so they both did well in school, but aren't very up to date with current careers and academia. So always were very encouraging, but maybe not up to date on what the education system is like currently. So joining NEFS was probably the most pivotal moment for me because it really was the only education I had on finance careers. So I'm really grateful for that. There's loads. I went to almost every event, every NEFS event that I could, which is sort of why I started off with such a broad finance career in a way. I didn't originally go, oh, consulting, that'll be me. I tried everything, landed on consulting because I didn't have any prior education on finance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about kind of your parents encouraging you and then also trying out a lot of divisions, but were there any sort of other challenges you faced when you were exploring the finance industry, and how did you overcome them?
I think when I came to university, I was so intimidated. Speaking to people that do economics here can be really intimidating. So many have parents who are in high finance who have told them to go into economics. Not all, not a majority, I would say, but they've obviously been educated about finance, and the only thing my parents know is they sort of go, oh, really high salaries, which isn't always, necessarily the truth. So that was really intimidating to me, that people came here, they already knew what spring week was. Obviously I knew about theoretically what summer internships was, but I didn't know about the spring to summer to grad role pipeline. My CV was an absolute mess. It was a nightmare CV. And I had no experience at all. I wasn't even a prefect in school. I didn't. Yeah. I worked in like customer service doing food for 3-4 years in total, but no proper, job.
Yeah. I think that even makes your success story even more impressive. I think the fact that you didn't know too much about finance. I mean, when we went into uni, we kind of knew. I wouldn't say it's from a family sort of point of view, but it was almost like we had decided on finance at such like early sixth form, and we were like, you know what? Now we know that when we get into university, we've got beyond springs, we've got beyond summers. So I think that was something potentially we had like a one up on you in that regard. But then the fact that you were able to still convert, which we're going to talk about later on, is even more impressive.
Yeah, and especially because me and Ali, we did the maths business econ combo at the same school, funny enough, and it was just, I guess we naturally got pushed towards finance. But then I took my gap year, and that just helped learn so much. But then, as you said, again, plugging NEFS, but those first few months, those events they hold, they're such a good learning experience, because even if you compare them to other university societies, there's some other stronger societies out there, but NEFS is really, really strong. I think that's a great segue onto the next part of this episode. So more talking about your experiences applying for internships, and then any tips you can give. So to kick things off then on that end, what was your approach to applying to internships? And then how did you stay organized? Because it's hectic, isn't it?
Yeah. My only experience really, I've had a few different experiences, but for spring internships, specifically spring weeks, I applied for such a wide range. I think I probably applied to 15-20 before I got an offer for Deloitte. And I think Deloitte was the first financial services or consulting company I actually applied for that then accepted me. I had done a wide range of trading, corporate finance, IB, literally everything. I did have a spreadsheet where it'd be like company name, a tick box for have I done the first stage, second stage, whatever it is, until I eventually got rejected. I think you need to do that because so many emails, I normally put them on not my uni email but my junky email, and they just get completely lost. So to keep up to track with that, and I know loads of people who've like missed their interviews and high views and that, and normally companies I would say are quite accommodating, and you can normally email them and say, oh sorry, can I have an extended deadline, but always have the dates of when it was due on there to make sure I didn't miss it.
I'm glad you brought that up, to be fair, because you've got a funny story about missing missing. You hate me bringing it up, but quickly share that one. 'Cause I don't think we've said it on the show.
Yeah, no, this was during my gap year. And do you know how there's these small work experience programs over the summer? Like JP Morgan does one, Morgan Stanley does one. So Morgan Stanley did the fact that they do one, and then I had not even a high view, a video interview for them. And then I just completely missed the email.
And found it like 6-7 months later, by the way, as well. So it was,
no.
and I wouldn't let him live it down because I knew you wouldn't let me live it down.
Yeah, because I went on the application page and it said that it said something like view interview, and then I'm trying to think back. I don't remember any interview. So, and then the funny thing is that we know someone who did that program, and they said that more or less everyone got the Morgan Stanley Spring Week after it. So
we're going to talk a bit later on about tailoring your applications, but I do want to ask, you mentioned rejection, you mentioned tracking it on a spreadsheet. When you were getting those rejections, how did you kind of face it? And then how did you bounce back and say, oh, it's all right, the next application will be it, the next application?
Coming from like a non-financy background, I wasn't always surprised. And I think even at the time, I felt really intimidated about the prospect of going into something like sales and trading or IB. So every application rejection that came for me, it wasn't exactly a surprise. But sometimes I think there was some cover letters that I would personally spend 2 hours on. And then I'd get the rejection from like doing all the research, all in all. I'd get the rejection from that one and be like, oh, I actually was quite passionate in my cover letter, so that's a shame. I know some people tend to do the just swap out the company name. I didn't. Obviously, you have the like why me, why the company, why the industry. I tend to keep the why me mainly the same, but I think, and the industry, yeah, but the last paragraph would change a lot on why the company. So
good advice.
Especially those cover letters, they take so long to write, especially for springs. And then there's that, I think it's November, December period where all the huge bulk of the rejections come through, and then every spring after that is just like, is there a point in applying? But anyways, then I guess now that you've been through that whole application cycle, how would you tailor your applications to stand out amongst the thousands and thousands of people who are applying for these roles?
I think I didn't see it at the time, and I don't speak on this from my experience applying. It's more from taking applications mainly for consulting director. At the time of applying, I think it's quite difficult to see what you're doing wrong, because obviously you wouldn't have done it if you thought it was wrong. But when I'm looking at other people's applications, it's really, really blatant to me. So I think it might always be like getting a peer review, I think is really important. Because we've got some amazing people that we've had apply to the consultant director role who we know are great, but the way that they frame their experiences, I think could be really, really improved. And that is what I would say is just how you frame your experience. You can have whatever you had. And when I joined university, I'd worked in like a chip and donut shop for 2 years, and that was basically it. I'd done serving ice creams, and that is all I had. I had some really good A-levels, but not much experience. I think it is how you frame that. So I think on my CV for when I was working at a chip shop, it was like handling X amount of transactions with maybe 2,000 customers a day. It was very busy, whilst balancing this with looking after my younger siblings and getting the A-levels that I did. So yeah, it is more about framing that experience, and also always using sort of like a STAR method. So situation, task, action, result is something that I would always recommend.
Yeah. Again, really good advice, and there's a lot of advice that we were expecting in this episode and a lot more to come. But what was that application process like for Deloitte? I mean, how did you prepare for that interview, I imagine? And then did you have to brush up on your commercial awareness? How did you do that? What's your routine for staying up with markets and news as well?
Something that I do like about consulting interviews is I do really enjoy geopolitical news, and I don't so much enjoy keeping up with like typical markets news. And geopolitical news is something that can absolutely be key using in a consulting interview. I would say one thing I also do like about consulting applications is there is a basic maths line that you have to reach, but the online tests were a lot more, I wouldn't say easy isn't the word for it, but for example, there were things that you wouldn't think of to put in an online test. It was like, write an email explaining this to this person of this seniority. I think that's not anything I'd experienced in any interview before that. And I don't really know how you would prepare for it, but it's an absolute key skill. I think when I was on my summer, I would spend minimum 2 hours a day just doing what I call admin, but just emailing, and making sure that it's appropriate for whichever seniority you're sending it to. For my spring interview, I don't really remember it because I think it was 2 years ago now. But for my summer, it was more doing case study after case study. I like to learn through YouTube mainly, so just watching loads of people doing case studies on YouTube, and then also structuring motivational questions. I think the base questions that are going to come up are, tell me about yourself, why this role, why the company. You need to have those rehearsed, essentially, is what I think, and sort of tell a story through them as well.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And then I think Deloitte's OA and that situational judgment test, I'm in a few group chats for Springs, and yeah, everyone says that it's not easy, but then it's very unique compared to your casual maths test or something that the other firms mostly do. But I know you've kind of touched on this before, but then what common mistakes do students make really applying for these internships or spring weeks?
I feel, as I said before, I can't speak on. I didn't do any summer or grad role applications, and I don't know what other people really do. I can speak on what I've seen are the massive mistakes while applying for consulting director. And for us, we actually did a bit of a session on this in the consulting division, because the consulting division is trying to help people get into the industry, and there were so many things that we thought we would have gone over surely, but are common mistakes that are being made. So CV wise, always use the NEFS template or just a normal finance template, making sure the spacing is good. It's such a simple thing, but if you want to be getting through, I mean, even for consulting director, we had 12 applications, going through 12 CVs. I can't imagine what it is being in Deloitte HR and having to go through genuinely thousands and tens of thousands. You need to make sure it's easily read. We've got people where they applied and they've got that much space at the bottom and it's all in font 10 or 11. So why would you do that?
It's a big pet peeve, especially when the margins aren't right and stuff like that, and it's just
Yeah.
annoying. It's it's a chore to read it, you know what I mean? And that's a big pet peeve of mine.
I just literally use the NEFS template, copy it out completely because it's got the spacing and everything. And then with motivational questions, it would just be STAR method again. And I think we've told our analysts you should really aim for answering for 2 to 3 minutes with your motivationals, because we had so many people where we know they have amazing experience that we've seen on their CV, but the way they frame it, it's not really answering the question. They just kind of are going on, and there's no punchline at the end as well. As one thing I would say about interviews is, in an interview, compared to a conversation, there's no natural end to when you're supposed to stop speaking. So it's very easy for people to just keep speaking, but you need to really have a structure so that there is a conclusion. Because when people start to ramble, it can be really difficult to get a hold of. So what's your answer to the question, for example, when's the time you faced a challenge? Going on and on and on about the situation rather than this is the result, and not hearing the result. It's you've not really answered the question we want to hear when you've overcome a challenge, And with consulting specifically as well, doing so many case studies with other people. I personally watch on YouTube. There's so many case studies online that you can use that are done by American universities that hold an MBA course, helping people to get into consulting.
I think we don't hear that a lot advice-wise about having a structured answer. I mean, because when I was in my first year, I thought, the longer my answer, the better, because I'm given detail and stuff. And then now I've sat on the other side. I mean, we take interns on for the show, and it's I actually don't want to hear your whole life story. answer the question, and if you give me a good answer, then I'll be like kind of more sort of engrossed in what you're saying. Because as you said, basically don't waffle. It's basically, and this especially in I remember interviews where I was like, oh, this is going really well, but then I realized it was just me talking, and you could literally see on their face that they were just zoned out. So that's really good advice. I think last question on this sort of topic. What's your take on, I mean, you mentioned 15 to 20 applications. I did like 80 for mine for spring. So there's a big jump there. So what's your take on quality versus quantity for applications? Because I learned that the hard way.
I think for springs, I would say you're going to need to have numbers around 20s, 30s. I personally got my Deloitte offer and just stopped because I was like, oh, yay, got one.
Yeah.
Fab, done it. I know a lot of other people do multiple. And for me, obviously, it ended up well that I just stopped there. But for springs, I would say maybe 20s, 30s. For summers, if you're going into it without an offer, not like I did, but 50s easily, I would say personally. And you never want to put them out where you're not tailoring it to a company where the person in HR can look at that and say, this is just such a broad thing and you're not applying for this position. But you do need to hit those numbers, I would say. Obviously there is a trade-off, but it's sort of how you personally deal with that trade-off. I mean, it must be really different for people who are just going for, say, for example, consulting roles, where a lot of the people I have in my division are going for consulting and corporate finance and a bit of a range. So I think there you would need a bit more time to work on quality to make them more tailored versus having one, I'm interested in consulting, and sending that out.
Yeah, no, 100% I agree, especially when it comes to summers, because springs you can get away with having I mean, even these days they really ask for specifics, but for a lot of springs you can get away with having like a general interest in the finance industry. But then summers, like, they're going to be paying you, you're actually going to be working there, so you can't, and they won't do that to someone with I guess a half of a resolve, if you get what I'm saying. But yeah, I think that's a great the way to move on to the next section of the episode, talking about your spring to summer and then that conversion onwards. So what was your mindset going into your spring week then?
I did not know what to expect at all, quite intimidated. And this kind of links into NEFS in a way, but I think every time I go into a room at a spring or a summer, often it's people from Oxbridge, all the London unis are a good minimum 2/3 of the people in the room. So when I went on my spring, there was one other girl who did economics at Nottingham that I knew, and I think there was maybe one person from Leeds or Sheffield, somewhere like that. The rest were all Oxbridge or London unis. So that really, really intimidated me. I think I must have gone to the NEFS conversion event. But I would say the Deloitte Spring is very unique, I think, compared to the rest of finance. So I went to the NEFS conference, and there was someone there from the recruitment team at Scotiabank, and she said that during the spring you will have the recruitment team sat at the back, and they will be typing up if someone asks a good question or a bad question, what the question is, how people are socialising, everything is kept on record. I don't think Deloitte Spring is exactly like that. I think a lot more of the conversion depended on my interview that happened between the spring and the summer. There were people from recruitment there, and we had an hour panel of Q&A with people who actually worked in Deloitte. But the spring event is actually run by people who are hired by Deloitte to do corporate events. So they're not people who are there tracking constantly what you're doing. So I think my experience might vary a bit.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I didn't know that, because I think sometimes students have an issue with going into the spring with just conversion in mind. I was going to ask if you kind of answered that. I mean, is it wise to just go into the spring thinking, right, I want to get that summer, or is it wise to make the most of it?
I don't think it has to be a trade-off as such. I think you can, if, for example, a more intensive spring where they're taking note of everything you say and do, if you show you're trying to get the most out of it, you're really enjoying it, you really want to be there, then it will show brilliantly to them. I think the way I sort of showed that in my spring, and this happened after I never thought about it in this sense. I never thought about it being a conversion, but this was in my first year, and I wanted to go into 2 separate committee positions in second year. And as I said before, I really noticed that I was one of the only people in the room who weren't from one of the London or Oxbridge unis. So after the spring, I was speaking to the recruitment for quite a while. I think I was waiting for my train, about why there are such low representation of people from Nottingham, etc., universities. And they just said essentially they don't really look at universities, it's just based on those online tests. And we were having a chat for ages about it. And in retrospect, I think that must have been something that they noted down, but at the time it was a genuine interest of mine, because I thought, I'm going into committee positions, I want to be able to pass this knowledge on to people, and I'm not going to be able to have this one-on-one chat with someone from Deloitte recruitment really for a long while.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Being authentic, I think that's the main thing. Yeah.
Authentic, yeah. It depends what your authenticity is.
Yeah.
I don't want to say like, oh, I didn't think at all about the conversion, because I know people do like assessment centre prep, and that can be really. There was an element of that when we were doing group tasks. Everyone's like fighting to talk, and I hate that. So even for that, I tend to take a bit of a step back, because I don't want to have to. I have a massive pet peeve for when people speak over me or speaking over other people. I won't do it, and that's what you have to do in that situation. I really hate it. So yeah, it depends, I'd say.
I'm the same, but also it feels so bad, you know, when like you've got like the kind of loudest or second loudest person in the room, and they ask you, "Oh, what's your thoughts on this?" Then you just know it's the worst.
Yeah.
And then you know people are noticing you being quiet, and it's just might as well call it a day then. But then again, you don't know what the company's looking for. Are they looking for someone that can kind of submerge in the team a bit better? Because they never know, they might see that person as a bit too bossy. So again, you should never kind of call it a day, you know, halfway through the assessment centre. Just kind of go with the flow. But I get what you mean. I hate being talked over. I literally had the assessment centre last week or 2 weeks ago, and I just felt like I couldn't get a word in. I was just like, and it was virtual, so it doesn't help, but I just literally couldn't get a word in. I was like, is it the delay or anything? But I just realised these guys just didn't want me to succeed. Yeah, but it can feel like that. But yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of touching on what you said before about that springs are mainly dominated by people in like Oxbridge and LSE, and yeah, of course, their background may have helped them a bit towards that, but then I think it's also in a way proportionality. So if you think about how many students from LSE are applying to Springs compared to Nottingham, I mean, Nottingham's a good uni, and of course you've got society, but then in comparison, there's so much more LSE students applying to these spring weeks. So I guess there's that natural shift towards those unis. But then, yeah, I'm not denying that having that background would have helped them. But it's more the other things that come with going to a uni, such as LSE. But yeah, I guess. So you you said that there was this interview at the end of between your spring and your summer, that of course you were successful in and you got the summer. Could you just talk to us a bit about that? How it was? How did you prep for it? Were there any other stages?
So that was my only stage. It was a 45-minute interview with a director in the team that I was going into, and it was, I would say, comparatively very chilled, but I think that's because that particular director, I worked under her for my summer, is so friendly and so lovely. She spent a lot of time in America, so I think that shows in her personality. She's just so like bubbly and happy all the time. So that definitely helped me in my interview. She was also, I remember we were just chatting for 5 to 10 minutes of the interview. The team I was in was quite niche, and the very niche area I'd done part of a module on. So I think she was sort of testing the waters of how much knowledge I had there. So she'd worked in the Bank of England for quite a few years, and as well in America. I'm not sure if she was at the Federal Reserve. No, she was in the central bank in the Netherlands, I believe. Yeah. The team that I'm going into with a graduate role, it's about minimum half of them have been working in central banks because of the nature of the role. So my interview was about 20 minutes motivational, 20 minutes case study. And I would also say, compared to, for example, the other consulting directors who were doing their grad role applications, I was so grateful for my case study. I'd prepared for a lot worse. It was a very simply structured one. And then the motivationals were to be expected. I don't think I really got caught out by any of them, but I went into the interview really, really nervous and came out of it quite, relieved. I hadn't got the outcome yet, but it was partially my interviewer and also it being very, I think Deloitte in general, they're a lot more focused on personality and soft skills than really grilling you on your technicals, of course. So it made me feel a lot more comfortable because that's what I'm really happy with, my personality and soft skills compared to my technical skills.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I know we've talked a lot about spring to summer, but I think the real sort of advice lies in summer to graduates. So how did that change? I mean, I imagine you had to be on it throughout the summer and then they took a holistic view. It wasn't an interview at the end. Am I right in thinking?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what was that like? So what was the summer like, first of all? Was it what you were expecting? And then how did you kind of put yourself out there, make the most of it to land that conversion to graduate?
So my particular summer was 6 weeks. It was 3 weeks in one team, 3 weeks in another team, and I wasn't actually in consulting in Deloitte. My role's slightly more corporate finance based. So I was in, at the time, the service line was called financial advisory, but now Deloitte has changed their service lines. So now my service line is M&A. I'm not really sure how the structures change exactly. It's quite hard to keep track of. So I did my first 3 weeks were in the government and infrastructure team, and then my final 3 weeks were in, bit of a mouthful, financial institutions, resolutions and recovery. So people call it FIG R&R or just R&R for resolutions and recovery. The first 3 weeks, it was a big team. It was about 120 people. There was 20 grads. The grads are like a massive friend group, really, really welcoming. The work I really got on with. And it was really interesting to be in the room with some of these partners that have had really interesting careers, and the work, being in government work, it really interested me. But it was such a stark difference to my final 3 weeks. I think one thing about consulting is usually your experience is really influenced by your client. So in the government team, it can be a lot more laid back and chilled. People act a lot more chilled. It's hard to put into words, but say, for example, timings were a bit more lax. Whereas in the FIG R&R team, all of your clients are banks. So the expectations tend to be a little bit higher. So it was very different. But I enjoyed the work so much in FIG R&R. And that team was only 20 people with 4 grads. So they're very, very, very different, completely opposite cultures that you would experience in a sort of consulting role. And I personally was more interested by the work in R&R, and I put my preference forward and then got an offer there.
If you think about it, that not every summer intern goes on to the grad role, and or for another way to say that, there's not 100% conversion rate. So what do you think made you stand out? Was there a specific thing you did, or as you said, it was assessed all over the summer? So is there something you consistently did throughout the summer to actually, for that team to go, okay, we want Rebecca back?
I think one thing that everyone always needs to show in their summer is being proactive and being curious, particularly proactivity in a consulting role, because you need to be constantly asking for work. Not particularly in my second team that I was in, and especially as a summer intern there, it was more given to me, but you always need to be checking on people, letting your managers know what tasks you're up to, when are they going to finish, what you're planning to take on next, always asking, hey, do you need any help with this, with that. One thing that I know people didn't get an offer back for is not being proactive. So not always being, not transparent, but proactive with sharing when your task is finishing and when you're moving on to the next one. I think Deloitte helps a lot with the conversion. So we have designated people leaders who are, in my first team it was a director, my second team manager, where you would have a one-on-one with them and they talk to you about your career aspirations, generally how you're feeling, and it is a very supportive culture where, for example, one of my people leads said to me, even if you're not interested in this team, tell me what team you're interested in. We can put you on projects that are closer to that to help you move there. And they also set up coffee chats for us already, so you don't always have to request them. We have coffee chats with other interns across all different service lines, and that are set up with us. I had a coffee chat set up with the partners for me. In my second team, because it was only 20 people, I had like lengthy conversations with everyone that was there, got to know them all really well. I think the one thing that helped me with my conversion is being quite proactive with the work as well, doing a lot of research, and if I ever had some downtime, being proactive again to search for things to do. And I think also for my particular team, doing some prior research and my modules that I did really helped, because it's about essentially preventing banks failing and what happens in the case that they do fail. So after the financial crisis, the Bank of England told all the banks that they need to submit yearly resolution plans, which says in the case of failure what they would do. So my team just helps the banks to create those documents. I did in my first year, one module called Current Economic Issues. One of them was about the financial crisis. So about what banks were like before. And then in my second year, I did Monetary Policy Economics, which focused a lot more on the similar sort of topics. And then I'd also, not purposefully, but prepared myself by being in the investment fund in NEFS and having a committee role in the trading society, because one thing that other people in the team or other interns may not have had is sort of accounting type knowledge, that I knew financial statements decently well from those roles, and people who typically are looking to go into financial services may not as well.
Yeah, cool. So we've heard a lot of the positives of the summer, but when you were actually in the summer, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced, and how did you kind of overcome them? Because it's kind of the first time you're in a full-time position in finance.
I think there's a bit of a fine line between asking for help to make sure you do something perfectly and not wanting to take up people's time for stuff that you can research by yourself. So a lot of the time I'd be going through a task that can be really technical in my second team that I was in, and not exactly understand it at the time, but thinking, I don't want to stop this manager every 3 minutes that he's talking and go, oh, what does that mean? What does that mean? So I just note it all down furiously and then go to my desk, research, and if there's anything I can't find, then I bring it to him.
Just to jump in, I never thought, because I'm worried about kind of, if I do get a sum, I'm worried about kind of, what's the word? Just kind of annoying my manager in a way by asking too many questions. So that's a really clever way of doing it, because then they might ask, oh, well, you could just look that up. Then I feel like really bad.
I'm guessing you have to balance it between, of course, not asking any questions, then that's of course no good, but then asking too much, you have to find that balance, don't you?
Yeah, I did have a couple moments where I wanted to seem independent, didn't ask as many questions as I should have, and in 2 cases should have asked more questions, got something a bit wrong.
It's the thing with it, I mean, getting a sum as a tier is an achievement in itself, let alone Deloitte. So, but then what people think that is that they put all that effort into the application. I'm not saying she must have, but then they've been very proactive in like interviews, so on and so forth. But then when it gets to that summer, they kind of start, I guess, putting their foot on the brake in a way. So I think, I mean, I can't really speak from experience, but then it's, once you get that summer, you need to go like even stronger in a way, just so that you can follow through with that for then get a grad role and then, of course, have a secured career. So yeah, I think we can move on to, I guess, a really juicy section of this episode. Not that the others have been anything less, but the explanation of consulting. So I know it's there's different types. You probably know better than me as a director of consulting at NEFS. But then, could you define what consulting is within finance and explain it to someone like me who's kind of unfamiliar with it?
I think the word consulting just means to advise someone, and it is specifically my experience in Deloitte. There's a team for everything to advise any company on anything they could ask for. So I think typical consulting, people would think strategy or management. So strategy might be, do we move into this market, this geography? Do we merge? Do we acquire? Things like that. You also have management, I think I'm not the best consulting director to ask about these definitions, but management, I would say, is more sort of about maybe staffing, that sort of thing. You also have, for example, ESG consulting. So how do we meet these green targets that we have? But as I said, the team that I was in for half of my summer is so niche. It's consulting companies or banks how to submit their resolution plans to the Bank of England. It's such a niche that no one would ever think, oh, I want to go into that, unless you might have worked at the Bank of England or had a particular interest in monetary policy or the financial crisis. But there is a consulting team in Deloitte for every single query a company might have.
Cool. That was like a perfect definition, to be honest. So what kind of problems do kind of consultants typically help clients solve? I assume it's very broad, but sort of on a general basis.
I think, again, it can be quite literally everything. I would say the most typical you would have as a case study interview, and maybe that I sort of imagine as, not that I've had any experience in this, or that was a lie, I have, is should we go into this product offering or should we go into this geography, sort of like business strategy. I think that is what people think of typically.
You're talking about business strategies and like geography and stuff like that, product offerings. Do you find that really interesting? Is that the interesting part, because the work's quite varied for yourself?
Yeah, I think that is what a lot of people that go into consulting, one of their main motivators will be the variety of something being new every day. I would say the team that I'm going into, obviously clients are different, but the work is more consistent. Although even in broader consulting, if as an analyst you might be more broad, and then as you gain seniority and you get more experience in a particular area, you might become a little bit more niche, is what I think is typically experienced.
I guess then kind of looking at what you're going into then, so I know you said your team was restructured and renamed, so but then how do you say M&A consulting differs from your typical financial advisory that other people do within the industry?
Yeah, I think, as I touched on before, I think in terms of work culture, the culture tends to mimic the culture of your client. So when I was in the government team, my dad is a civil servant, and I know his work-life balance is extremely relaxed. I mean, still there's sort of a standard in Deloitte if you always need to be keeping yourself busy, but I think the standards are slightly different across different teams there. I think I didn't personally, so because my team's very niche in the M&A service line, I didn't exactly work in the M&A team or transaction services, but speaking to people who have, their expectations are not something you would expect from Deloitte. So some of them had insanely long work hours. Their work hours, for example, in transaction services, is essentially a role that mimics investment banking. Their hours and their work culture is very, very similar to investment banking. So I think, yeah, it's when you work in mergers and acquisitions, in consulting even, it's more about the culture, and also the work just becomes more like typical investment banking culture and day-to-day experience, really.
I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I think that's a good way to kind of ask a question about what sort of misconceptions the students have about consulting. Because for me, very sort of ignorantly, I was thinking lower hours, and like again, I think even before we started filming, we were talking a bit about like pay to work ratio and stuff like that. So is that something like that's a big misconception about kind of the hours, and what other misconceptions come with that?
I would say the biggest misconception, and this is something that came up in our interviews for consulting directors so much, is everyone saying, I want to work in consulting because I want to think of, a strategy or something and then see it implemented. Often in consulting, you will give the strategy, and this is talking about general consulting, not particularly my team that I've experienced, but you will give a strategy or maybe a choice of strategy, and the client can choose whether to implement it, whether to not. But the majority of consulting companies don't stick around to see how well it's implemented, how successful it is. So everyone says they want to go into consulting to see this tangible impact that they've made. It's not always like that. There are quite a few consulting companies that their whole niche is being a consulting company who actually stick around to see the change and help it to be implemented, rather than just saying, our people have suggested that you do this and good luck doing it, that they help to implement it. So I think that would be the main misconception. And then with salary to hours, I think Deloitte is a company where they really, really, and I'm not sure if this was just because I'm a summer intern, I don't think so, I think it's similar for grads, but in both of my teams, they really told us you're not working any later than 6. I came in just before 9 and you're going home at 6. In my first team it was 5, like that was the cut-off really, maybe 5:30 I stayed until. I think one time I tried to stay before 6 and I was like, no, I just really need to finish this, like I'll just finish this, I don't want to start it again in the morning. And I was just told like, no, please go home. Yeah, I do think part of that in that team that I was in does come from, as a graduate I'll be doing either a CFA or an ACA, so even when the work day finishes at 6 you need to go home and do some studying. So I think staying later would come at the expense of your studies, really. And that's why it's pushed so hard for graduates. In my team, anyone manager and higher, that is not the same. I think the directors easily work 12 to 16 hours a day, which I don't think anyone really expects. And that was never explicitly told to me.
Yeah.
But I did kind of catch the vibe that they're always on. So.
Yeah, but I guess in a way, I know it's even with long hours, but then if you're doing something that you enjoy, and then of course 12 to 16 hours, then there will be hard times, of course, that you'd prefer being in bed at home. But I think if you've got a passion behind it, it can justify those hours. But anyways, moving on from that, then, is there any important skills you'd say which are necessary for succeeding within this, I guess, facet of finance?
I think the basic ones I would say is you'll be using Excel and PowerPoint daily, so brush up on that. I always thought I had, on my CV, I had Excel good or something like that in my skill section, and it's only when I got to the internship I thought, wow, I was not that good. So that was a bit of a steep learning curve for me. But I don't really like to focus on the hard skills because I think anyone can pick up that, and everyone should really know that you need to be able to do PowerPoint and that. More of the soft skills that I would say is something I've really had to learn since being in first year, is being really, really outgoing, putting yourself out there, not only to your team, but like to other interns, making a lot of connections. Even now, people that I spoke to in my internship, I'm asking to help me with my dissertation just because they work in the industry, in the banking industry that I'm looking at. I'm doing a dissertation on banking regulations. So to have their sort of expert opinion on it is really important. But in consulting in specific, this isn't really applicable for my team, but often you have to sort of find yourself work. And especially if you want to go into a niche, whereas as an analyst you might be more broad, making those connections to find yourself work, particularly work that you might want to move more towards, will be like absolutely fundamental. It's not really the same for me in quite a small team. I'm usually, at least in my summer, was always delegated work, and that's like an analyst job. This like PowerPoint moving, things like that, some research, but it's quite hard to say be good at networking and socializing, so it's not exactly something you can teach, but as one thing that I think was really key.
Last question of this topic, kind of the explanation of consulting. So for students interested in consulting, especially after hearing what you've said in this episode, what's the best way for them to gain relevant experience?
I really like this question. My experience when I was in my first year was really, it was not the typical spring and summers really, because as I said, I didn't really know about springs. Particularly for people at the University of Nottingham, the university does so many really, really valuable experiences. In my first year, I did a month-long summer internship with a local consultancy that I know. I don't really know anyone else that's done something similar to that. So when I was applying for my summers, I'd already had a month during spring and 2 months during my summer doing internships, which no one else again has. And the university has also offers these paid at the living wage, which is really great for example, myself. I would need to work the whole way through the holidays to be able to sustain myself at uni. So if I didn't have the opportunity to do a paid internship, I wouldn't be able to do an internship. I would have to make money. So I think it's great to do. And those places as well, they are far less competitive. Some of them are, have one applicant for every place. I think the average is 2 applicants for every place. So compared to, I think like JP Morgan grad roles are like 10,000 applications for every place. It's brilliant. I think especially more for consulting specific, it's the way you spin your experience. So I did a term time internship called the Nottingham Consultancy Challenge, and it was with a church in Newark, which is an area close to Nottingham. So it's not what people would think as the typical consulting project, and I don't know, again, for IB how relevant that would be, but for me it was so enjoyable, and people love to hear about quite unique experiences, I think. So instead of saying, oh, I did a Deloitte spring, I can say, oh, I did 6 weeks working on this project with a church in a community and trying to help people in the more deprived part of the community integrate in to getting the most out of this church, which is a really, really unique experience. I think more people can, not a lot of people can use that. And committee roles have been really great for me. I had to do one big end of summer internship PowerPoint presentation in front of the whole team, even the senior partner and the other partners and all the directors, literally everyone. So having so much experience presenting, I do it every week with the consulting division. I'd done it every week in Trading Society. It was really valuable. And again, those places, for example, for consulting director, we had 12 applicants for 3 places. So not as competitive.
I mentioned this at the start of the episode, but your mentor then, as soon as those applications open for these smaller roles, I'm going to be going for them, because trust me, because at the start of this episode you told us that you walked into university not having as much, you didn't really have any direct experience, and then a year later you've become such a strong applicant. But anyways, I think that your response was a great way to kind of move on to the last section of this episode. It has really flown by, and so I'll just kick it off by saying, so you've mentioned this in your last response, but then how have your extracurriculars really shaped your career then?
I think, as I said, when I started off, they were so broad, but I think everything I've done has led me to where I am now. So you might think, why being Trading and Investment Society committee? How has that got anything to do with consulting? But that was really, really valuable for me. For example, for me specifically, looking at financial statements, I used that so much during my internship. And that's something I learned through Trading Society and being in the investment fund. I've done so much project work, so much client-facing stuff where I've also had to give presentations. So I think all of my experience I kind of class into either research or more technical. I've had a load of research roles. In my first year, I did a summer at a political organisation called the Ditchley Foundation, and it was to research people who could be valuable to having in their network. So again, you don't typically think, oh, that's consulting. It's really, really far removed, I would say. But that research was really valuable, and the connections that I made during that internship are really valuable. I think I have so much experience that people wouldn't think goes into advisory roles, but all of it sort of works in a way. And for example, being in the investment fund, that sort of leads into an asset management path, which doesn't directly link to consulting at all, but where I learned their financial statements and presenting every other week. Again, really valuable. The more experience I could get presenting, the better I think it was, because now I feel quite comfortable doing so.
I mean, we've talked. I mean, across the whole episode, you've talked about NEFS and the lessons you've learned from there, and how your just now you talked about how your extracurriculars helped kind of and the impact they had on your career. But you've done so much. You're doing so much. I mean, first you're talking about the summers you did there as well. What advice would you give to students who feel overwhelmed with balancing all their commitments?
I think in my first year, and I will always give this advice to analysts, and it's maybe not the best advice. During my first year, I focused maybe 50-50 my time on extracurriculars to studying, maybe even less on studying. I still got a first in my first year, so I think that balance was about right. In my second year, I did not do so well. So in my first year, I got 72%, but I also did a Deloitte Spring, a month-long April internship. Then I did my summer, and I also did a term time advisory project. And then I think I also did Enterprise Rent-A-Car, the company. I did an advisory project for them. But then my second year, I had so many extracurriculars. So I did investment fund, which takes up so much time because it's creating a stock pitch every other week. I know other people who are in the investment fund would maybe spend half an hour on their pitches. I would spend 5 to 6 hours. So I like to be very, very thorough if I'm recommending someone to buy something. So that took 5 to 6 hours every other week. I was then a consulting division analyst as well. That took not as much time, an hour a week, because for that I just turned up to the sessions. There wasn't any work outside the sessions. And then I was also women in trading is kind of like a subsection of the trading society. I think it was a vice director role where every week I'd do sessions teaching people about trading technicals, like fundamentals. And that year, my academics didn't do so great. And I'm still this year, I'm now paying the price for that. I was still really, really wanted a first. But my average that I got last year, I think I have to get 74% this year to get first. So it's not out of reach, it's just really, really difficult. Yeah. So I think you need to find a balance where you can be getting your target grade. And for example, last year, because I was so busy with my extracurriculars, I'd always be going to my tutorials. I hadn't looked at the work before the tutorial. I just wouldn't go because I hadn't looked at the work, and I'd be like, there's no point. Missing so many lectures. Second year was so tough for me because of I didn't do maths, and we had so many compulsory maths modules that I found really, really difficult. So I don't know if I'm the best person to advise on keeping that balance, because last year I did not do very well on it. But I think the one thing I would say is maybe front load your extracurriculars into first year, where I think this is common across all universities. Your grade doesn't count in first year to your overall grade. So even though I got a first that year, doesn't count.
Yeah. Mine's the same.
Yeah.
It's gutting because they didn't tell me until after as well. Like the tail end of the first year, I was grinding. I didn't have much on, to be fair. I was like, oh, uni studies are going to be so tough. The jump from GCSEs to A level is way bigger than the jump from A level to uni. So I was expecting that jump again. And but they just didn't tell me that the first year wasn't going to be graded. And I was like, that's good to know. Thanks for telling me.
It's still good to get your basic knowledge.
True, yeah.
For economics, it's your micro econ and econometrics. But
yeah, I mean, for maths, it's it's the same thing as you guys. So that first year doesn't really count. But then you do need to know your first year modules, because second year and onwards it kind of builds up on that. Yeah. So we're now 3 questions left, or only a few questions left for this episode. So looking back at your university journey, then Rebecca, what did you do that you're the most proud of?
For me, it would have to be consulting division. I think we have tried our absolute best to improve it so much this year. And last year we had 5 sessions that were all theoretical, so about the theory of how to get your summers and your grad roles, doing so many case studies, talking a bit about interview prep and things like that. And I personally have tried to integrate a little bit of all the different experiences I've had. So I've done a load of project work, and we decided to do a case study competition where we get our analysts to work on an actual company advisory role. So we got in contact with a company that has a 15 to 20 million pound revenue yearly, and they gave us access to pretty much all of the financials. We set our analyst a task that was sort of about, I previously mentioned about case studies about should we move into this geography. It was sort of that sort of task. We partnered with another university consulting society for that, and that was something that hasn't been done before, and we had so much feedback from it that was people really, really loved it. And I think what we wanted to do is, when people ask me in interviews about my consulting division analyst position, they told me how to do case studies, but there was nothing that would be transferable into a grad role, whereas now giving them that actual experience doing the job, it was a lot, I think, is a lot more tangible to be talked about in CVs and interviews, and that was the aim of it. And then also bringing in loads of people to speak to the analysts has had really good feedback as well.
It's a really good answer. I mean, these last few questions we asked to everyone just to kind of get sort of different responses. So another one that this is actually Naman's, I'm stealing his question, but if you could give your first year self one piece of advice, whether it's career advice or studies or whatever it may be, what would it be?
I was thinking about this question earlier, and I think I'm very happy in the position I'm in now. And I think if I went back and changed anything, I don't know if I'd necessarily be in the position I am now.
Yeah.
So I think the weighting I had of studies and extracurriculars was really good. Maybe I should have done a sports team then, because I don't really have time to now.
Yeah.
So something more like that. Maybe to do some more summer work in preparation for second year, to look at my modules in the summer because I had so many extracurriculars on. But I think the one thing I was thinking of saying was apply to more consulting spring straight out. But then I think if I would have done that, I might not have been as prepared for my Deloitte application, which I did one of nearer the end. I wouldn't have had the experience from the higher views and the maths test from the other ones. I might not have got into my Deloitte spring. Probably wouldn't be here now because I wouldn't have got the summer or the grad role. So yeah, maybe just focus on studying during the summer when I have more time to do not a lot. But again, I'm really happy where I am now, and if I would have changed it then I might not be here now. So
in some of our old episodes, we used to get that a lot, right? We used to get like,
really?
Yeah, exactly. For example, like these, you can't have regrets because then it might change where you are now, and that's a big thing. It's butterfly effect or something like that, right? And
that's
what
I was going to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we do get that even from professionals. They say the same thing. Like we spoke to this MD at Barclays, and he said, "I would not change a thing just because I might not be where I am now." So it's a profound answer. Yeah,
because even those mistakes have kind of shaped your journey, haven't they? So, but finally, the last question of this episode, then, what's the biggest takeaway you would want students to take from your story and your journey?
I think when I was in a position, when I came to university, I didn't really know about consulting. And being in NEFS, it's fab. IB sort of careers are pushed far harder than any other thing in finance or anything that could be related to economics, because it's the finance and economics society, economics and finance. And you have the global economy, consulting and research divisions, but they're not as sought after, well known. So you can go into like doing an economics degree, you can go into civil service, things like that. So I just hope that this episode allows people who might not know about finance the way that I didn't to understand more the world of consulting and how it can be an option for people who aren't as quantitative like me, or just enjoy like a client-facing, more creative role in a way. Not to feel intimidated by sort of IB, sales and trading, finance, and that there are other options of what you can do with an economics degree or in finance, and not all the high-paying roles. This was my weird perception of finance. The better at maths you are, the higher paid you are. Not really. You can be great at networking and like partners that you have in consulting. They're there to find the work. They're there to talk to people, to make relationships. They're going to be the highest paid in the company. They're not really, it doesn't require a lot of maths. I don't know why I had that. So yeah, overall, just anyone who's not great at maths or doesn't have any prior knowledge, that it's really not easy, but you're able to get into a finance career.
Amazing. Well, bittersweet, but we're at the end of the episode. Rebecca, I just want to thank you again on behalf of our listeners and viewers as well for joining us. Hopefully we didn't ask too many questions and we didn't waffle on for too long, but genuinely it was really a pleasure to have you on the episode. And for our listeners and viewers, if you're listening to us on an audio platform, be sure to follow us on there. But if you're viewing us on YouTube, then be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done already, so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads or any of our other content as well. And our social media platforms are in the bios of all of our other platforms, so you can be sure to check us out on there, show some love and engagement on there as well. That's where we announce our events and internship opportunities that we have to join the team. But thank you again so much for watching. We'll see you next week for another episode of the Smart Money Show.